Who is Angron? Angron is the Primarch of the World Eaters. He was raised on the brutal world of Nuceria, fighting as a gladiator slave and having his aggression enhanced by surgical implants known as the Butcher's Nails. The only Primarch taken into service of the Emperor against his will, he fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy, afterwards becoming a demon prince of Khorne. Savage in a state of constant rage, he was nonetheless renowned for his battle prowess, and alongside Leman Russ and Vulcan, was considered one of the most physically powerful Primarchs. The Chaos Emissary to Lorgar called him the Fighter. During this scattering, the boy that would become known as Angron was thrown to the civilized world of Nuceria, far from Terra. He plummeted into the icy mountains of the planet, and not long after, a slaver found him, and a scene of carnage surrounding the wounded young Primarch were the corpses of numerous Xenos. Imperial scholars would later theorize that they were Eldar who had foreseen the great bloodshed that Angron would cause and had tried unsuccessfully to stop him. After being enslaved and nursed back to health by the planet's ruling masters, known as the High Riders, Angron was brought to the planet's capital, Dashia. Still a frightened young child, he was subsequently dumped into a pit consisting of a single cigarette with hundreds of other slaves. Acid filled the pit, and to the cheers of the spectators, Angron was eventually forced to kill all around him in order to stand upon the cigarette's uppermost platform and survive. Shedding a tear for the first time, Angron was proclaimed a promising newcomer to Dashia's arena combat and given the name Angron the Car, which meant child of the mountain and property of the house of the Car. After this, Angron became a famed gladiator known as the Unbeaten, becoming a fan favorite of Dashia and reaping many victories. The closest thing he had to a father during this time was the older gladiator Enamus. After the duo managed to slay two berserk organs, his masters ordered the two to fight one another to the death. Angron refused, and the High Riders ordered that he undergo a psychosurgery known as the Butcher's Nails as punishment. Upon being implemented with the nails, Angron was loosed upon Enamus and killed him in a blind frenzy. When Angron regained his senses, the despair of this revelation caused him to unleash a bestial howl for days. The death of his friend proved to be the last straw for Angron, and he led a slave revolt amongst his fellow gladiators. Gathering a great army of slaves, they fled into the mountains of the planet, where he lived for several years. The civilized cities sent armies to destroy Angron, but none were able to oust the Primarch and met the same demise. Nonetheless, the issue was never in doubt. His forces had little to eat in the barren mountains and were exhausted from constant battling. His fate seemed sealed when 7 well-equipped armies surrounded Angron and his starving forces. In desperation, Angron fed his trusted comrades his own blood to keep them alive. Just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor of Mankind's fleet arrived in orbit over the planet. The Emperor teleported directly to Angron's point of deployment with a few trusted Adeptus Custodes. The Emperor promised Angron a legion made in his image, limitless power, and lifetime spent perfecting the art of conquest. But to his surprise, Angron refused. He chose instead to die amongst his comrades while fighting his oppressors. Reluctantly, the Emperor returned to his flagship above. Yet, just as the battle was about to begin, the Emperor teleported Angron against his will back up to the fleet. He could only watch in anguish as those he regarded as his brothers and comrades were quickly annihilated. In a rage, Angron killed one of the members of the Custodes, which surrounded him, but was forced into a state of submission by the Emperor's psychic might. Angron angrily asked why the Emperor not intervene to save his comrades upon Nuceria's surface, but the emperor dismissed the question as lacking vision. He was the emperor and had his eyes set upon the galaxy, not a single tyrant battling a slave revolt. The emperor expressed hope that Angron in time would learn to understand what he had done. Angron stated to the emperor that he was meant to die upon Nuceria, and now but a ghost remains. The emperor replied that a ghost would suffice for what he had planned for him. Before Angron could reply, he was teleported to a nearby vessel of the 12th Legion, the Warhounds. Angron initially refused to have anything to do with his legion, and when several captains tried to talk to him, he brutally killed them, as they had been ordered by the emperor to not raise a hand against Angron. The dead included the acting legion commander, Gir. Eventually, Captain Karn of the 8th Assault Company managed to form a rapport with Angron, talking about the rituals of Angron's gladiators and their traditions of the Warhounds. Now convinced of their worthiness, Angron took full control over his legion, which he renamed the World Eaters, saying they would form new traditions together. However, in the early days of Angron's leadership, he still refused to acknowledge most of his sons, who could not survive the implantation of the butcher's nails. At one point, Angron simply abandoned his legion, hijacking a frigate and disappearing. After 2 years of searching, Karn was able to track him down to a feral world where Angron lived like a savage and revealed that he was simply seeking a foe that could put him out of his misery. Karn eventually convinced Angron to rejoin the Legion by reminding him that his Nucerian comrades would hate to see him in this state, and with the promise that he would try to lead the World Eaters to shed their sleep. Angron ordered that the World Eaters conquer their targeted worlds within 31 hours, a single Nucerian day, and the time he had scored his greatest victory upon the planet. The World Eaters consistently failed to capture worlds within this time limit, and each time Angron ordered decimation as punishment, forcing 1 of every 10 World Eaters to be killed by his other 9 brothers. After several of these episodes, Centurion Mago finally refused to again enact decimation after the Genna campaign. This caused Angron to be thrown into a raged frenzy, during which he murdered several nearby World Eaters until being subdued by his Liberians. While Angron lay comatose and had his memories of Nucera absorbed by the young Lexiconium, a crisis erupted across the Legion as Mago attempted to stop Galhan Sarlek from installing the perfected butcher's nails in all of the World Eaters. Mago's revolt came at its climax on Genna, where Karn slew the rebel Centurion, while Angron slew Tethys. Now at the head of a legion wielding the nails, Angron reaped many victories during the Great Crusade, although some criticized the extreme and bloodthirsty tactics he used to ensure the destruction of his opponents. At some point following the rediscovery of Angron, Archenland was brought to a secret laboratory hidden in a dormant volcano and tundra location on Terra to aid in the Emperor's investigation of Angron's crude augmetics as the Primarch lay unconscious. Land had previous experience with the device taking over Angron's body, having seen it when investigating the Hexarcharian vaults before he ordered them sealed due to the threat the items posed within the presented machine cult. He told the Emperor that it was called the Cruciamen, but the versions he saw were more crude. The Emperor explained that the implants were not his doing and that he believed they led to Angron's instability. He also explained that they were recreated to remove the ability to enjoy anything but anger. When asked if the Emperor could remove it, he admitted that he could, but the tendrils were deep in Angron's head and spine, and he was missing his limbic lobe and insular cortex. The butcher's nails therefore replaced part of Angron's brain, allowing him to live. During the Horus Heresy, Angron would team up in the Shadow Crusade with Lorgar and his word-bearers to strike at Ultramar in conjunction with the traitor offensive at the Battle of Calth. Angron, seeing Lorgar as a weakling, refused to cooperate with him and frequently wasted time sacking and butchering strategically worthless targets. The tensions between the two Primarchs boiled over to a near battle, which was only interrupted by a Dark Eldar attempt to assassinate Angron himself. After the two Primarchs worked together against the Dark Eldar, they put their feud aside. However, Lorgar recognized Angron's instability and hidden sorrow over his forced departure from Nuceria, recommended that Angron return to his adopted homeworld to find a sense of closure, as well as possibly overcome the Butcher's Nails, which were slowly killing him. When the two Primarchs arrived, however, they discovered that the slave lords of Nuceria had massacred Angron's comrades and told the population that he had fled during their last stand. Infuriated, Angron ordered that the World Eaters and Word Bearers purge Nuceria of its population. During the battle against Imperial forces, Angron saved Lorgar by stopping a Warhound Titan's foot with his bare hands before it could stomp on his brother. Later, the Ultramarines led by Guilliman arrived determined to exact revenge on the traitors for the Battle of Calth. Angron went on to duel Guilliman himself during the battle, defeating the Primarch in a furious rage, but while Guilliman managed to escape thanks to an intervention by nearby Ultramarines, this was precisely what Olgar wanted, and Wordbearer's Primarch became a coronate ritual. Using Angron's rage as a conduit, Lorgar channeled the power of Khorne and surged the Red Angel with the powers of chaos. Angron was transformed into a hulking, even more bloodthirsty avatar of violence and rage that had overcome the debilitating effects of the Butcher's Nails. For his new form, he was given a massive, black rune sword forged by the Dark Mechanicum. The first words that the newly ascended Angron spoke were his desire for Khorne to massacre slaves in the lower decks of the Conqueror and build him a skull throne. Angron and his World Eaters went on to mindlessly rampage throughout the galaxy, ignoring Horus's calls to muster at Ulanor in preparation for the drive on Terra. Perturabo himself was eventually sent with orders to bring Angron into Ulanor at all costs. Upon the world of Deluge, the Iron Warriors arrived to find the population butchered and sacked into mountains of corpses after withstanding an assault by grazed World Eaters and coronate demons. The sky opened up and Angron himself entered the carnage. Perturabo and Angron engaged in a brutal battle, with the demon having the clear edge in power and speed. However, despite taking many wounds, Perturabo endured and goaded Angron, declaring that he was born a slave and now was a slave to darkness for all eternity. By using the Iron Warriors, Iron Circle, and Volk to outmaneuver and bombard the World Eaters, Angron was bested as the Ultramarines' fleet appeared in orbit over Deluge. Angron laughed and declared that they were all now going to die, but Perturabo reminded the demon Primarch that he had seen his warriors butchered while he had done nothing once before. This moved Angron enough to act, and after creating a warp storm, the Iron Warriors and World Eaters fleets were able to escape the Ultramarines and move to Ulanor, where they accompanied Horus for the muster. Angron subsequently appeared in the climax of the Solar War as a massive warp rift opened up over Luna, which allowed the primary traitor strike force to assail Terra itself. Angron was seen perched aboard one of the battlements of the Conqueror. By the siege of Terra, Angron was a blood-crazed slave to Khorne. He demanded that Horus allow him to directly attack the Imperial Palace, regardless of the fact that the Emperor's psychic barrier around the world would see him likely die in the process until such a time where the traitors could weaken it. After hearing the Mortorian's death would instead be the first to assault Terra, Angron fell into a rage and massacred all he came across within the bowels of the Conqueror. Latora Sarin feared that he would murder the tech priest attending to the vessel's reactor, risking a catastrophic meltdown. This forced Karn to confront Angron with the ship, where the Primarch revealed he knew of the Eighth Captain's ultimate destiny and wished to supplant himself as the chosen of Khorne. The two battled, with Karn being little match for his Gene father. However, before Angron could finish him, Karn replaced a teleport Homer on the Primarch, which transported him to the shifting maze within the nearby Night Lord's flagship, Nightfall, within Angron. Became trapped and spent his time battling the many traps within the maze. Later, when traitor rituals weakened the Emperor's psychic barrier on Terra, Angron was shot out of the Nightfall and into space, where he made his way to the surface. Angron appeared in front of Terra as a flaming meteor, landing and slaying friend and foe alike. He fought his way to the walls of the palace, where he saw Sanguinius and roared a challenge. Sanguinius refused, saluting his brother and stating that while they would battle one day, this was not the day. Angron raged, but due to the lingering effects of the Emperor's barrier, could not pursue him into the palace. During the Battle of the Lion's Gate spaceport, Angron destroyed a capital Imperialis and then a Leviathan, but was again unable to advance past the palace walls. When the Lion's Gate spaceport fell to a massive traitor assault and the Emperor's shield shrunk to only encompass the Sanctum Imperialis, Angron led a horde of World Eaters to the Eternity Wall. Angron and Karn led an assault on the Eternity Wall spaceport, and in a moment of clarity, the Primarch began to regain some of his old noble visage. He gave an opportunity for the defenders of the spaceport to surrender, though they responded by blasting him to pieces with their gun batteries. Angron quickly regenerated and, along with his World Eaters, massacred the defenders of the Eternity Wall spaceport. He later struck down the lone Imperial Army trooper Olinus Pierce as the mortals stood before him. In the prelude of the Siege of the Eternity Gate, the barely sentient Angron was physically guided by Horus to find and kill Sanguinius. At the seat of the Eternity Gate itself, Angron finally met Sanguinius in battle. Though weakened from his earlier fight with Kabata, Sanguinius nonetheless next faced his demonic brother. After a climatic airborne battle, Angron impaled Sanguinius upon his black blade. However, Sanguinius used the opportunity to rip out Angron's butcher's nails, causing the demon Primarch's head to explode as Angron pleaded. With Angron banished into the warp, the World Eaters lost whatever sanity they had and began to cut down their own allies. This broke the traitor advance just short of the Eternity Gate. By this time, Horus was eventually slain by the Emperor, and the traitors were forced to flee Terra in defeat. Already savage and brutal, the World Eaters quickly found a new master in the form of the blood god Khorne, eternally demanding sacrifice and skulls. Angron led his legion into their worship and oversaw his legion's retreat into the Eye of Terror.